Welcome to the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. Companies to survive in the short term and thrive in the long term have to maximize profit. Too often they don't realize that the only way you maximize profit is to first optimize a people-first culture. It's the culture that does the work. It's the culture that's innovative. It's the culture that's operationally excellent, customer intimate. The culture does all those things. And so this podcast is dedicated to helping people recognize that maximizing profit and culture are the same issue if you want to be successful for both purposes. And today, we're lucky to have with us Stan Sipes. And Stan has been a friend, a peer, an associate, a confidant for a long time at this point. And I have to say, I'm thrilled to have Stan here. He's the poster child for an entrepreneurial leader. And he's been an entrepreneurial leader in a global Fortune 100 firm. He's practiced business internationally. He's worked in the print industry. He's worked in boutique, high-value consulting. He started what was really a groundbreaking, glass-breaking software company of his own. I think the only thing that was a challenge there, he's about 5 years too early for the rest of the market. Today, they want everything he was doing. We were just a little early with that one. And his last position was another glass breaker, where they broke into an industry that's been around forever, and they literally transformed a significant niche in that industry. And he took a company from about 60 million to over 300 million in, I think, about a 5-year period of time. And when you think about that kind of growth, you figure Stan must have had 50 salespeople working for him or some big, huge team. And I'm going to let him tell you the details, but he accomplished that through thought leadership, innovation, really intentional strategy, and just did some really, really cool work. So Stan, I am thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Rick, as always, it's so good to see you. You've been as you said, a colleague and a partner, and I think a mentor to me. It's always great to reconnect with you because you remind me that best practices are called that for a reason, and you're a constant reminder that things don't happen by accident.
Well, thank you for that. I gave people a really shallow introduction, in the sense that there's so much depth to what you've done. But please tell us about your background, because I think each of those elements in your background have contributed to particularly the last big success you've had. And then I do want you to share what that was like with the audience.
Yeah, and let me see if I can capture that, as quickly as possible. But because it was so foundational to where I've become, I think it's important as a perspective. So, as a college student, yes, I'm going to go all the way back there. As a college student, I was a civil engineering major. Played baseball at the University of Illinois, but recognized when it was time to get a job that the civil engineering world wasn't for me. So I pursued interviews with organizations that were looking for, an opportunity to take someone with a technical degree, but bring me into a management opportunity. And I was very fortunate that, as you say, Rick, probably one of the Fortune 10 companies on the planet, Caterpillar, hired me and brought me into their management, development side. And in that time, I worked there for just under 12 years. I was able to work in Geneva, Switzerland. I was able to work throughout the Midwest. I was able to, they moved me to the Southwest, all in a capacity of working between the organization and the market in a variety of different roles. Caterpillar is which I didn't recognize until I left. Just by being there, I learned things by osmosis that, quite frankly, I assumed when I left were part of the world, were the way everybody did things. And I'll get into a little bit more detail later on what I meant by that. But intentionality with respect to the product, knowing that they were differentiated before they ever released anything, developing the right channel. You know, Caterpillar is a research and manufacturing, design, and logistics organization to support independent owners of their business that sell and service their products in very hardline established territories, giving them true insight into the marketplace through entrepreneurial organizations that were their partners. Your word was a bond at Caterpillar. We had, I can't tell you how many millions of dollar deals were consummated with a handshake, and both parties did exactly what they said they would do in contract form. A lot of things that many of you may be raising your eyebrows going, yeah, right, sure. I'm telling you, it's the way their world worked, and it's why they are who they are. And then from there, they moved me to Phoenix, Arizona in 1984. In 1990, they offered me a 2-level promotion to move back to Peoria, Illinois. If any of you know Peoria, Illinois, it's where I was born and raised, near there. I had promised myself I would never live there again, so I quit. And I thought, you know, it's time to go figure out whether I can actually have an impact. And I got an opportunity with a custom manufacturing company in the printing business in the Southwest, whose son had taken it over from his father and driven it into the dirt. And they had about a $2 million run rate. And myself and some friends tried to buy them. They ended up turning the tables and coming back to me in my early 30s and saying, we want you to run it, and we're going to pump money back into this company. Plants in 3 states, custom printing in large volumes was our business. I didn't know what dots per inch meant. I couldn't, you know, I still today probably can't tell you what DPI means. But we took a company from a $2 million run rate to an $11 million run rate in 11 months. And all I did, to Rick's point earlier, I recognized after my first meeting with a customer when I said, hi, I'm the new president of XYZ printing company. The client looked at me and he said, why would you admit that? And I fortunately had a CFO that was a partner, and I went back and told him that. And I said, we got to change that. We've got to, and the only way we change it is creating pride in our people, and make sure that every day when they walk in these doors in all 3 of our plants, they're excited about what they're doing and the value they're bringing to their customers. And we did that. And within a fairly early time frame, we began seeing things turn. Now, the other thing that I learned is that I'm a business development guy.
Yeah.
At Caterpillar, I never had to be. Our dealers did that. Now I was the president of a company. I represented the brand, and it was me. We had 3 sales guys, 1 in each plant. But I had to be there. I had to be up front. I had to be the one making the promises, and I had to be the one who's, you know, my colleagues, my sales team heard me make the promises I made, and they carried it back to our organization, and we began delivering, and we began, you know, doing things that they had never dreamed they could do, taking on profitable business versus somebody who had a magazine they wanted to print and they promised they'd pay us later when they sold ads. That became a no-go. So I quickly learned, okay, what can we do? What should we do? And we went and did it. I learned a lesson of naivete in that organization, in that I never signed an employment agreement. I only signed based on verbal promises of salary and equity. And And when they sold it, they slid across the table to me a 2-week severance and said, you're welcome to negotiate with the 3 companies who bought the 3 plants. I was like, does this really happen in the real world? And yes, it does. So lesson number 1. But I got to tell you, the journey was a blast. So now I knew that, I could make a difference. The next thing I did is toward the end of that time with that printing company, I came across a boutique manufacturing or custom consulting organization called MAP, Management Action Program, still around. They were 40 years old at the time. They're 60 now. In the early 90s, they had an incredible approach to changing organizations from the top down by introducing self-awareness to the leadership team, but most importantly, a language of execution that, given the same assets, you can get a lot more done. And I was so intrigued by what I had seen in them that I went to a wedding, literally went to a wedding, and at the reception, I sold 2 people on going through the MAP process. Called the organization. I said, I should probably sign up because I've got a couple clients for you. Well, the rest is history. I ended up creating about 300 clients over the course of about 10 years, and working with thousands of managers, and just had a blast. And, but again, business development, listening to the customer, listening to the buyer, understanding what they valued, and not being a hammer looking for a nail, right? If I didn't think we could add value, I walked away. But if I thought we had value, I was able to explain to them how and why. And I have relationships with many of those 300 organizations still today. At the end of that, I saw an opportunity toward the end of that time frame. Rick mentioned a software company that I saw, and again, what we were bringing to an organization was a language of accountability, a language of execution, where you were always focused on your vital few as an organization, and you didn't waste time. You focused on how do we do, what are we going to do better, and we did it collaboratively. And about that time in the late 90s, the computer was moving from behind the CEO and their credenza to in front of them. And software companies like ACT, Contact Management, and others were being utilized in the sales side, but there wasn't anything for an organization to be constantly connected to one another based on their vital few. And so I created it, a company called Goalcentrics, and raised the money, launched it. And as Rick said, we were successful. We grew exponentially in the first 2 years, but we hit a wall because not everybody wants to truly be that transparent and accountable. Yep. There are factions within organizations, which I hope can be one of our conversations about how individuals can make a difference. But when it comes to broadcasting a platform like this across an entire organization, small or large, where everybody is transparently working with one another based on what they've all agreed are our priorities, it's a lot for people. Today, platforms like that are out there, and everybody knows they've got to do it. You can't waste time. And meetings in my world have always been a waste of time. We were able to, what I always told everybody is I said, look, our goal, our opportunity here is to make goal setting and achievement a simple and repeatable process. And we did that with Goalcentrics. Today, there's many lookalikes. I get calls from people all the time saying, God, you were out there a long time ago. But anyway, that we had a failed buyout on that. So I moved on, got back into consulting for a little while. Took a sideline into the commercial real estate, commercial development world for a while. Loved it, had a great time, was pretty successful, but I didn't like it. Wanted to get back into the business. And the other face you're looking at here is the reason I got back into a company called Total Transit, a transportation company that had 3 businesses. Rick was consulting with them He told them he had a guy that could come in and be their director of business development, and it ended up happening. Another business, I had no idea what it was about. Taxi business, paratransit, kind of dial-a-ride business, and non-emergency medical transportation, 3 different divisions, about a $50 million company. The only taxi company in the country that blew away Yellow Cab in its market. Largest Prius fleet in the world, a lot of innovation. And what we were able to do, long story short, is from 2012 through 2014, early 15, when Uber and Lyft came into our market, we were able to explode. We're the only taxi company in the country that did that when Uber and Lyft came into our market. And the reason we did it is we had a revenue culture. We intentionally found out who's our buyer, who trusts us, who wants to be with us, and who doesn't trust those guys. And we intentionally targeted them, and we were there if they called us. We weren't the typical taxi that you call and never shows up. We made sure we invested in resources so that when these customers started to call us, we could get them. It was a basic revenue culture creation, intentional, and we grew that company. Well, late 2014, both Uber and Lyft dropped their rates to 70 cents a mile. And we, in early 15, said, we can't compete. We got to make a profit. Again, to one of Rick's earlier points, we were very profitable. There's no way we could compete with 70 cents a mile. The best we could do would be about $1.50 a mile. And even then we might lose taxi drivers. So we said, we got to figure something else out. So the next thing we did is we recognized and admired what Uber and Lyft had done to our sleepy little industry called transportation. And what I mean by that is they had figured out an answer in our industry using technology to match supply with demand by having a virtual fleet that you could morph up and down as far as size to match demand using surge pricing, right? And surge payouts for your fleet. And look across any logistics challenge. That is your biggest challenge, is to match supply with demand. And they had figured that out. So we looked at the non-emergency medical transportation world and we said, you know what? It's highly regulated, but if we could bring that concept into non-emergency medical transportation, not only could we revolutionize service, but we could also create significant profit out of it, because our relationship as a logistics manager, a benefit manager of transportation for health plans, for states, was our relationship with our independent contractor fleets, most of which at that time were taxi companies, non-emergency medical transportation specialty companies that own their vehicle, own their drivers, own their facilities. And so as a result, they have a rate they have to be paid to survive. As a result, you got to pass your transportation costs on to your client. And with our direct relationship with independent contractors, there's no middleman, it's just us. We could pay them a lot more than they could get with Uber or Lyft, but yet still offer our customers better value on many fronts: transparency, cost, reliability. That, gosh, if we can do this, we could turn this industry around, and Uber and Lyft are never going to credential their drivers. Right. Meaning background check, drug testing, CPR, first aid training, bloodborne pathogen training, all the things you had to do in the government business, in a government sponsored business, or in the taxi business, that Uber and Lyft got away from. And they couldn't afford to. They can't afford to do all that. So we said, you know what? They're never going to do that. so let's take this model and let's see if it works. So we took 2015 to build the platform, to test the market, test our ability to recruit, onboard, and train rideshare drivers, but rideshare drivers that were different. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but the first step is we're selling into a very conservative marketplace, right? So the first step that our CEO, Josh, and I took were to go out into the industry and meet with 150 decision makers and tell them about our vision and tell them about what we had, not to try to sell them, just to see what they thought. And of course, we got zero no's. So we said, okay, we're going to launch. In early 2016, we transitioned we named the company. The first thing we had to do is name the company, identify what our brand pillars were going to look like. So we did that in the latter part of 2015. We officially launched in late 15 and then actually, went operational in 2016. And at the end of the day, it's not as easy as it looked on paper. But we went from that, $50+ million size that we had brought clients in from Total Transit. We went national, very intentional, and we grew the company to about 320 million by the time we sold it in late 2022. So, and Rick, to your point, a little bit more about this. So how'd we do it? I'm willing to go as deep as you want me to go, so I'm going to let you be the lead here. But we did not have a cadre of salespeople. These deals that we intentionally went out to get, they come in different forms, right? So they came in our world, they come in the form of direct sale to the health plans, and they come in the form of required requests for proposals from the state Medicaid agencies. Both of those entities manage the transportation benefit for the Medicaid industry, for the now $80 million or 80 million Medicaid members that are in this country. Transportation is a required benefit that was defined in 1965 when Medicaid was created. Medicaid, Medicare were both created within months of each other. Medicare was created for the elderly, a health plan for the elderly, and we all know why Medicare was created: to get votes, okay? Yes, it was to reduce taxpayer burden on people that went to the hospital and didn't have insurance, but for the most part, it was to create votes. Medicaid was created for financial reasons. The underprivileged, the poor, held off on healthcare until they had to go to the hospital. And you cannot and could not in 1965, as a hospital, you could not refuse care. You can't refuse care to anybody. If somebody comes to the ER, you can't ask them for insurance, at least at that point. So the taxpayers, was all on us. We paid for that hospitalization. So Medicaid was created as a health plan for the underprivileged, for those that were under the poverty line. But the foresight of the creation of Medicaid was brilliant in that they understood that it's great that these people have a health plan, but if they can't get to their health care, what good is a health plan? So they're still going to wait until they have to call 911. And so let's create a transportation benefit that if you can prove you need a ride, you get a ride. So the world of non-emergency medical transportation was formed in 1965. For decades, it was horrible. It was hard to manage. It was unreliable. And in the Medicaid business, Medicaid payers, health plans and states alike, they want perfect and they want it for free. And so there's not much profit in it either. And so when Veo introduced this novel idea of reliability, transparency, interaction with the member being able to see their ride coming, very much like the consumers had experienced, all at a lower cost, it was revolutionary. And but these buyers, especially the health plans, didn't want to be first.
Yeah.
So they were like, hey, this is a great idea. Once you come in and prove it in our state, we'll be second. So it was a lot of work on really understanding the level of pain and making sure they recognize their level of pain
Yeah.
so that they'd be willing to pay. And by the way, we never had to drop our price below the competition. Never. Because our promise was your pain's going away. Medicaid, if any of you are in healthcare, you understand, especially if you're in Medicare or Medicaid, you know that the number one quality metric that they all measure is member satisfaction. And complaints are how they measure that, right? Non-emergency medical transportation is the number one complaint in both industries. Always has been. And while it's a tiny little piece of their budget, it's painful. Because if there's a lot of complaints, their state regulator is on them about you better fix it, you better fix it, you better fix it. And for decades, what's called a non-emergency medical transportation broker, which is what we were, we changed the language to benefit manager, but we were a broker. And brokers kept saying, oh, this is really hard. You don't understand. It's really hard. And they just made excuses for decades. And as a result, everybody just kind of accepted the fact that it was going to be a horrible service. And no matter what you paid for it, it was going to be horrible and unreliable. And it's going to be our biggest pain point. We changed that. And that was fun. So RFPs, we began winning because, states look at when they get an RFP, 700-page RFPs, they look at us, say, God, nobody else is offering anything like this. And so we started winning state contracts. Once we started winning state contracts, it gave us credibility. Health plans started buying, the rest happens. Now, how did we do it? We did it with a team of 2 salespeople. And you think, gosh, there's no way you could do that. Yes, you can. I had one focusing on the states and I had one focusing on private healthcare. These are big deals. And quite frankly, that first impression is vital. And I was involved with many of those first conversations, initial conversations and ongoing conversations. But the reason we were able to do it with just 2 people is we knew who we were going after. We understood the market. We understood which buyers had the most pain, where we could go, where regulation fit what we were trying to do. We changed regulation in 9 out of 9 states that we tried so that we could bring our rideshare model in. Rideshare was a dirty word in a lot of the legislation. So they had said rideshare can never be used in Medicaid. But we were able to change it to say rideshare cannot be used in Medicaid unless the drivers are certified. And we were able to get that done every time we tried. We do that first, then we bring our product in. And so we grew very quickly in the first year and a half, 2 years from that 70 million to about, just under 200 million. And then in our last, 2019, 2020, early 2021, we grew to over 300 million. And we were about to bring in another 100+ million when one of our competitors, the number 2 in the industry, said, we can't let them keep taking our business. We better bring them in. So they bought us. And so now that company is called MTM Veo. So you're welcome to look them up. But anyway, Rick, I don't know if that's enough. That's too much, but.
No, Stan, that's fascinating. Two things I'd like us to talk about before we get done. One is, and the 2 people is to me just an amazing story. And it's about the discipline and the strategy that you applied that allowed that to happen. But in the whole journey, I know one of the things you did, and Veo is a great example, is it wasn't, BizDev's not an isolated silo. You work with, so tell the whole organization story so people get a feel for that.
Yeah, every organization is different, right? There are, and you talk about this a lot in your revenue science work about how in some organizations an individual can carry this revenue culture by themselves. and make it happen, right? In an organization like ours, I felt from the beginning that there was no way we were going to earn the trust of our prospects unless they could really see behind the curtains, see everybody in our organization, everybody that was going to touch them, everybody that was going to be with them. And so when we would have our final presentations to organizations, we insisted on it being in person, and me bringing not only whoever our, the sales lead was, but our EVP of technology, our CEO, our chief operating officer, our quality manager, and the individual who managed our networks of drivers. We brought the whole party to the party, and I have to tell you, the preparation for and the execution of that, we had zero silos in our organization. I mean, we all knew that our number one goal was growth. That's it. Everybody was committed to that. And we knew that what that meant was two things: high closing percentage, and once we close them, execution. High value, surprising execution that we could use to maintain our momentum. And that's how we did it, because the entire organization was committed to that client. That client knew they were committed, and we look so much different than any of our competitors. And so anytime I could drag any of my colleagues to conferences, to meetings, anywhere, I did that because our revenue culture was real, but it was value creation that was at the center of everything we did. We knew what the pain was. We knew that, that they had never heard anything like this before and would have a hard time believing it, right? But you have to build that. Depending on where you are in the organization and how big your organization is and how complex it is, Veo is a very complex sale and a very complex product and a very complex delivery. You got to have everybody on board, right? You've got to have everybody committed before you ever launch, because these launches are huge, they're important, you're talking about 200,000 lives up to, our biggest client had 1.8 million lives under management. So you're talking about changing the life of that many people in one day. And so the preparation for it and the lead up to it, it's so painful. It's never gone well in our industry for 50 years. And there was no reason for them to believe it would be any different with us. But I have to tell you, you can talk to our clients. They'd say it's freaking amazing. We had the latest implementation we did before we left was in Louisiana, and the chief operating officer on print said that the complaints from Veo were less in the first month than any month in the previous 5 years with the previous broker. And so that's what you have to do, right? You can have a revenue culture. You can be passionate about selling, but you've got to be able to deliver the value that you promise, right? So that's how we were able to do it with two salespeople, right? Because everybody was involved in who we targeted. Everybody was understood why we were targeted. That's what our monthly meetings were about, right? We're about, what's my closing percentage? What are my KPIs? How are we doing on those? Who is it going to be? Why is it going to be them? Who's going to be involved? And when you're selling $10 to $80 million chunks of business, you can, if you close a lot, if you close a high percentage, you can focus, right? So that's how we were able to do it.
And that I love the story, and of course I love what you guys did at Veo. Why don't other organizations do that? What gets in their way? And you've seen literally thousands of companies over the years, and all of them could do what you guys did in theory. Why don't they?
Yeah, you know, Rick, that's what I've been thinking about since we sold. Because I've been asked the question, I've been very fortunate to be a part of high growth companies, for the most part, you know, even at Caterpillar, right? And so I've been asked a lot, hey, how'd you do that? Hey, how'd you do that? But every time I was asked that, I was on to my next thing. And so my answer was flippant, but quite frankly, the truth, which is we didn't know it couldn't be done. And so that's where it starts. That's where it has to start, is there has to be from the top a commitment that we are going to do what it takes. That's why we live. That's why we exist. And that has to cascade from not only belief, but it has to be in writing, and it has to be in your vision and your mission and your values. And it has to be, we are going to deliver more value than anybody else in our industry. And we're going to be relentless about that. And everything we do is going to be about that. And that's where it starts. Okay. So I said, I've been trying to answer that question now. And so what I've been able to do, and this is kind of high level, and it's certainly not all the answers, but what I've been able to do is look back at my little corner of the world. And then since then, kind of testing this with some sustainable growth companies who have all nodded their head. I said, I think there's about 5 things that have to be there. It starts with the value proposition, right? And the value proposition, in a perfect world, you have a veil, right? Where we are completely different than everybody else. And still today, no one's been able to perfect our concept of rideshare, credentialed rideshare. Nobody in the industry, 6 years later, they've all tried. Nobody can do it. It's not easy. So you either have that, right? You have what you know is better than anybody else. Or you have to, as we did with Total Transit, you have to figure out a way that you can deliver better than anybody else. And you have to message that. And that has to be at the core of not only your messaging, but how you deliver, right? So the best example I can give you is let's go back to Total Transit in the taxi industry. When Uber and Lyft came in, now I got an app, I can call it, I can see my driver, it's done, better, cool, right? Who would ever argue with that? Especially when the price was about the same. Well, because the taxi industry was, I never know, no transparency, whatever. So what we knew we had to do is say, look, we have figured out through personas and studies where our clients are coming from. And we were a call-in cab company. Okay. We're not a hailed cab company. We were a call-in. So 85-90% of our trips were phone calls to our call center. So we promise to deliver not only had to be in our messaging, we did things that were crazy. We did banner ads, we did television ads, we did radio ads. At the times when our personas were watching. But we also had to, when the call center got called, our call center agents had to say, you can count on me. You can count on me. I'm going to make sure this happens. And we did. But because we had the fleet behind it that we had invested in, we promised these drivers, you lease a Prius from us, you're going to get trips. And we were able to grow. So we created a way of building a value proposition that no other taxi company in the world could touch, and Uber and Lyft couldn't even touch, right? So that's what you have to do as an organization first. You have to say, okay, what will make a difference? And in some of the cases in my life, it was go out and talk to the customer. talk to the marketplace. What do they want, right? You can have the best hammer in of any carpenter around, but if you can't find a nail, what's it matter, right? So that was one. The second thing is I talked about the leadership team and I talked about commitment, but then it's got a cascade in strategy, right? In how we do things. You talked about culture. A culture is simply what we've agreed we're going to do and how we're going to get things done, right? So starts with leadership, starts with alignment, and then that's got to be in writing. That's got to cascade throughout the organization. Sounds easy, right? Well, we have goals. Well, sorry, guys, that's not enough. And then you got to have a management system. You have to have the second piece of that strategy then, and wholly separate, by the way, is how we execute.
Yep.
No, no silos. No, everybody's got to know exactly, here's the target within my department. Here's the number. Everything's aligned to that. That number contributes to the next level and the next level to the ultimate number, right? So you got to have a management operating system. I was fortunate at MAP to have delivered one to 300 companies. I know what it looks like. It's not complex, but it's hard to maintain. The fourth piece is you got to have resources. You have to have the resource to grow, right? So if you're going to grow that top line, you could grow it profitably, but there's an investment that is required, right? We had to invest in taxis, right? At Vail, we had to build the technology. We had to go in ahead of time and begin building our markets, right? You got to have resources behind you to do it, right? And so where does that come from? Well, it could come from the bank. It could come from investors. It could come from the pocket of the business owner, whatever, but you're going to have to invest in that. And operate profitably. By the way, one of the things that happened to us at Vail, Rick, was 2018. We failed in raising money, and we were growing crazy, right? We were about the 180 million range, right? So we're just growing out of our shoes. And the funding entity that we had, which was twofold. One was the former two companies. The taxi company and the paratransit company were no longer profitable, so they couldn't fund us. And the other, the Vail company, we were all part of one family. And then secondly, we failed at getting an investor. So in April of 2018, we said, we got to be profitable by September, or we can't keep growing. So briefly, we took our foot off the growth gas pedal and we operationalized, we changed our most important number. Our most important number was now profit. And so everything was cascaded to that. And by September, we were profitable. And so then we put our foot back on the growth gas pedal and off we went. And now the banks were happy. Now the bank said, okay, we'll extend your line of credit. So you got to have those resources. And then the fifth piece that kind of captures everything here, but it's something that I've been reading a lot about. Rick, you and I have talked about it. And that is what's called the collaborative quotient of the leadership team and the organization. So you can say we have no silos, you can say we have a great operating system, but you have to have a high collaborative quotient, which is kind of a new thing that's been written about a lot lately, which means at its core that you're humble.
Yes.
That you never usher the words, we've never done it that way, or that's not how we do it. It's the willingness to listen internally, externally, wherever you need to, especially to the marketplace, to your customers, with respect to what do we need to be doing? What do we need to change? And I wish I could tell you there are metrics for that. But we're working on it, aren't we, Rick?
Yes.
But it's easy to see. It's easy to see. I've been fortunate, again, as I said, to be a part of organizations. When I look back, it was like, that's what we were. Yep. We were humble. We were driven. Yes, we were confident and we were mission driven, but at the same time, we recognized that no idea is a bad idea. and let's go get as many as we can, and let's make quick decisions, but let's do it together. So anyway, so that's my corner of the world. And as I said, I've taken this idea out to some companies that have proven that they're sustainably growing over time, and they've said to me, "Wow, yeah, that's us."
Stan, I
we
got
need to keep it going.
this has been spectacular, and we're running out of time. But I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
What's your advice? You know, because you've talked about the power of one person in an organization and that they can have an impact. So what's your advice for new people in their career, whether they're just coming out of college or, you know, they've had that first job and they're looking for the next one? And then the second half of the question is, what's your advice for senior leaders who are trying to create that revenue culture that you were just describing?
I'll start with the first one, which is a real pet peeve of mine, right? Which is this engagement thing, right? I can relate to people who say, you know, young people who get into a company and they kind of look at it as a job, you know, and they just aren't necessarily feeling the mission of the organization that they're a part of, right? I consider that a mutual responsibility. We're just coming off a time, but I think it's still there, where my advice to young people is always, look, don't expect to know exactly what your dream is right now, you know, because there's in my life, there's been, you know, there's one faction of our people, of our community, that knows when they're 5 years old what they want to be, and those are actors, musicians, and artists. they know it, and I've always been jealous of that, because I'm a civil engineering degree, and then I get into management, and I was like, gee, and then it wasn't until 12 years later, I was like, God, I love business development. This is what I am. But I was never really tied to the mission at Caterpillar. You know, it was great and I learned a lot and it was fun, but I was always looking to go, where can I have an impact? So to answer that question, Rick, I'd say be patient, but listen to your mission-driven self, right? You can find it, you will find it, but don't necessarily think that, okay, once I've decided this is my mission, I got to stick with that mission, because we change as people. And I think if there's anything that I could say, it's that I waited too long to leave Caterpillar. Because it's been a fun ride since, and I really valued that foundation that I got. But value every day, try to learn, keep learning, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, just keep learning and be serious about, you know, those work hours. You know, just try to do everything you can, be as transparent as you can with your boss. Hopefully, you know, the reason people leave companies is not because of the company, it's because of their boss. And, you know, if you're fortunate enough to land somewhere where your boss really cares about you, really cares about your growth, you're going to know it. Because I've been in both places.
Yeah.
So that's my first, is keep looking, right? Keep looking, you'll find it. Keep reading, you know, whatever your interests are, don't bury them, you know, let them live. And then as it relates to senior leaders, I don't know of many senior leaders that wouldn't like to experience high growth. You know, but we all get caught up in structure. We all get caught up in the way we do things. We all get caught up in short-term profits, and we all, a friend of mine that wrote a book, Rick Benson, or Lee Benson, sorry. He writes a book and he says the responsibility of a leader is to both eat and dream. And he said, unfortunately, what eating means is working on your company, working in your company, right? But dreaming means working on the company, thinking about where are we going, how are we going to get there? And he said, unfortunately, most leaders are 75% eating, 25% dreaming. And his recommendation is that it be flipped, right? 25% eating, 75% dreaming. And I can tell you, I'm a dreamer. And it wasn't until I, got out and got out from under Caterpillar that I was able to do that. And I think that's what it takes. It takes, back to, okay, we've decided we're going to grow and we're going to do what it takes. So those 5 things that I gave you, where are my gaps?
Yep.
Where are the gaps? Let's close them, but we're committed to closing them. And it works. And if you're a senior leader on a team where you're not convinced, you can convince your colleagues of this. Look, you may not be the BD guy. You may be the ops guy, but you're convinced that we can grow. But our BD guy just seems to be, he's just transactional, and he's just, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get the value concept. I'll take a phone call any day, anytime. It's my dream that I can help exactly those companies, Rick, is that, I think I've had enough experience now and failed enough times that that's all I want to do.
Well, Stan, this has been wonderful, and we could go for another hour without any trouble, but I want to thank you so much for being here today, and maybe we'll get you back another time. I think there's still a few more stories we can tell.
Yeah, I'd love that, Rick. Thank you.
Okay. Well, for those of you who joined us, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this half as much as I did, and I hope you'll be with us the next time. Thank you.